Muhammad Ali is the self-proclaimed greatest of all time, and it's hard to argue with him. He used his complex footwork and lightning-fast jab to beat his opponents senseless, and then threw flurries to finish them off when he sensed they were near done. Today we're going to break down how Ali used a specific sequence of steps to circle his opponents far out of range and then dash in and out with a quick jab. We're going to start with the footwork, so if you're only interested in the jab, you can skip to the timestamp here. One of the surprises when I watched Ali's slow motion was that he had very regular patterns to his footwork. Today we're going to break down his most iconic sequence, which he used to rapidly circle to the inside. This is the one you think of when you hear float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Step 1 is to step to your opponent's inside with your lead leg. Step 2 is to bring your feet close together, hopping on your front foot as you do so. Step 3 is to hop off your front foot again and swing your back leg behind you. And step 4 is to bring your front foot back into position. Here's the sideways view with no pivoting. Step, hop, hop, step. This sequence allows you to cover a huge amount of distance with minimum effort, and each step is another chance to pivot, accelerate, or change direction. Ali may have had the best jab in boxing history. Let's take a look at his execution and then see where it fit into the footwork pattern that we just broke down. First, Ali pushed off with his back foot to close distance and generate some power. Then he whipped his hand out elbow first like a back knuckle. He landed on his lead foot and then pushed off of it to pivot and dart back out of range. This is pretty unconventional. I can't imagine a boxing coach who tells you to put all of your weight on your lead leg when you jab and let your back foot come way off the ground. Oh, and lean really far forward too. But this lack of structure is what allowed Ali that great mobility. By the time he completed his jab, he had drastically changed the distance in center line. In musical terms, Ali's timing was on the half beat. If you were counting 1 and 2 and, Ali was in range on the 1 and out of range on the and. Now, let's put it all together. How to practice Ali's circle and jab. Ali almost always threw his jab on step 2 of the footwork sequence. With his feet close together, he would propel himself off his back leg, then pivot off of his front foot and continue the pattern, starting over again. Step, hop, hop, step. You'll notice the second part of Ali's jab is the footwork from step 3, where you hop off of your front leg and swing your back leg behind you into the side. So the footwork for his jab blended seamlessly into the pattern he used to circle on the outside, and he could continue the sequence without interruption. By moving rapidly in a wide arc, Ali made his opponents lose their balance and timing when they tried to follow him, and he took advantage of the openings that this created in their guards. There are a lot more footwork patterns that Ali used, and there will be more videos on them and his other punching techniques in the future.
Pryor was a light welterweight knockout machine, with 35 of his 39 wins coming via KO. And he accomplished this while punching with his chin high in the air, with little of the structure used for power and protection that most boxers learn on day 1. The downsides to performing the art of boxing in this manner are pretty obvious, but despite this, he enjoyed a massive amount of success. Something was making up for Pryor's lack of traditional safeguards, and that was his footwork. Pryor could be defensively responsible when he wanted to, but it was rare to see him do so while punching. This is because he had such unpredictable but stellar footwork. It worked for defense while allowing him more opportunities to land his offense. We've recently covered a lot of footwork topics in depth, making entire videos mapping out southpaw footwork, switch hitting footwork, and lateral movement. In those videos, we went deep into specific techniques and really complex tactics. Today, I want to simplify all of those and break all kinds of footwork down into 3 unifying concepts. 3 guiding lines so easily understood that you can start using them right away. With these 3 principles, you can create any of the advanced positions covered in the previous videos. And now, you'll know the why behind them. It just so happens that Pryor, with his pure reliance on footwork for so many things, will provide us with the perfect examples of these 3 control points. For example clips, we'll be using footage from one of his fantastic fights against Alexis Arguello and another great bout against a southpaw opponent, Akio Kamita. The control points are pretty simple, but in combination, they're a powerful tool. They are linear distance, lateral distance, and angle. The first point is to control the linear distance between your opponent's lead foot and your lead foot. Linear distance is about being in range to hit while being out of range to get hit. The second is to control the lateral distance between your lead foot relative to the opponent's lead foot. Lateral distance is about lining up your punches to hit while being out of line of your opponent's punches. And the third is to control the relative angle between your rear foot and your opponent's lead foot. Angle is about closing off while opening up your opponent. Let's look at how and why these are such important factors. First, the linear distance and position of your lead foot relative to your opponent's is so important because it determines your range. This first control point is ridiculously simple, but trust me, it ties in a lot to the other two. Basically, just think of this as which punches you're in range to get hit and which you're in range to hit with. Depending on what kind of fighter you are and what range you want to fight with, that will determine how close you want to be. If you're a shorter infighter, then you'll want your lead foot pressed up to or past your opponent's lead foot. If you're an outboxer, you want it far away. Mid-range, you'll want it somewhere in between. A fighter who's great at all ranges like Pryor will be able to move his lead foot back and forth between all of these ranges. Range is not only about getting close enough to land certain punches, it's about moving back to create space to land punches. Or about getting out of the way of the opponent's punches before moving back in. Like all footwork, it should be fluid and dynamic. The next control point is the lateral distance between your lead foot and your opponent's. And here is where it gets interesting. While linear distance is about which punches are in range, lateral distance is about which punches are lined up. Can they hit through or around the opponent's guard? Moving to the left or right will always line up one arm with the opponent's center line, while creating an angle for your other arm. Here, moving left lines up Pryor's right shoulder with his opponent's nose, while creating space for his left attacks to come from the side. Here he moves right to line up his left shoulder with his opponent's center line, while creating space for his right hand attacks to come from the side. Here he plays between moving left and right to line up different attacks, while taking away some of his opponent's attacks. As a general rule, the more you step to the inside toward the opponent's open side, the more you open up both yourself and your competitor to attacks. The most basic and simple method in boxing is to step forward, adjusting the linear distance, while stepping slightly inside, adjusting the lateral distance. This will put you in range for your jab, but also the step inside will create an angle around the opponent's shoulder and arm, so it's not in the way and you can get at them. It's like medieval cavalry flanking a group of foot soldiers to make their shields ineffective. See here how landing the jab from the correct position where it connects with impact allows Pryor to follow up with his other punches. These details matter, and learning them really pays off. Stepping inside can even work when you're in an opposite stance from your competitor. Even though it's generally considered the worst position against southpaws, it's all how you use it. Check out our video on southpaw tactics to learn more. Just remember that the deeper you move your lead foot inside, the more you open up both yourself and your opponent to attacks. When Pryor stepped deep inside, he bet that he was either better or just plain tougher than his competitor, because stepping inside puts both your opponent and yourself at more risk. In contrast, stepping outside is generally thought about in terms of cutting off your opponent's attack while lining up your own. If done quickly, you will force them to spend time turning to face you again. In the meantime, while they're doing that, you can attack at will. Either way, inside or outside, can be used to quickly exit an exchange or avoid it altogether. Changing the lateral distance will force the opponent to stop moving forward and realign themselves. So, while drilling and sparring, pay very close attention to the position of your lead foot relative to your opponent's. What position keeps you safe, and what position clears a way to land the punch you're trying to land. Lastly, there's control point number 3, the angle. Once you've set your position with your lead foot, you control the angle by adjusting your rear foot relative to the opponent's lead foot. This will determine how squared up or narrow you are relative to them. You may want to be narrow, closed off, and have them be really open. Or you may want both yourself and your opponent to be squared up. Continuing with the previous jab example, most fighters will step forward and in. Then they'll jab, and then pivot to readjust the angle. This last movement closes them off and gets them back to their regular stance. Of course, angles get far more complicated than that. Let's say that you just stepped inside and forward, adjusting the linear and lateral distance. From there, depending on how you adjust your rear foot, you can end up narrow while keeping your competitor squared up. Or you can move into a squared up position, which is great for combinations. But how does this work with shifting stances, which Pryor absolutely loved to do? Well, it's all the same rules, but they apply to the new lead foot and new rear foot. Just remember, your lead foot controls linear and lateral distance, and your rear foot controls the angle. While these can all blend into each other, thinking about these basic factors and how they work together will give you the blueprint to construct beautiful footwork. While we like to show extreme examples for clarity, remember that a fight is won by fractions of an inch. That's not just punches, that's the subtlety of your footwork too. You can also control distance with head movement and angle with trunk position, just in a more limited fashion. The footwork is the broadest brushstrokes, what Pryor was so good at. Think of these 3 control points as the framework. Get good at these, and you could rule the ring like Pryor. It's time to cover the most advanced of the advanced footwork in combat sports. Tricks that you can use to link different types of footwork together. It requires insane athleticism and the rapid manipulation of your momentum to pull a lot of these off. They're tough and dangerous. But if you can get them down, you'll be able to stay quite literally one step ahead. Able to blend 2 different movements together to save time, rapidly change directions, and cover massive distance. The point of this breakdown is not to create a complete list of transitory footwork, but to showcase some fun and entertaining examples that can get you thinking about how to put more emphasis on your transitionary footwork. Many of these examples break all the rules of their respective sports, and as such, you're not likely to see them taught in a gym. If that bothers you, or if you feel you don't have the necessary athleticism to pull these movements off yet, that's fine. Just try and take the lessons behind them to heart, and maybe come up with some simpler ideas that will work for you. I'll be moving through advanced tactics at a pretty fast pace here, so if you'd like more detail or clarification, check out the individual breakdowns of the fighters mentioned, or watch the extensive footwork breakdowns released within the last several months. Let's get to it. First, there's the combination of a shuffle and a pivot, and if you build up enough momentum, this can become one fluid motion where both feet leave the ground. Lomachenko was a master of this. The trick is to start pivoting on your lead foot the moment the shuffle begins, and this way you could not only cover distance, but you could rapidly change the angle of attack. Here's an even more advanced version that Lomachenko pulled off while sparring UFC champion TJ Dillashaw. Lomachenko switch shifts from southpaw to orthodox, then pivot shuffles to create an angle, landing a body shot. And here's Mr. Low Kick Rob Kaman, chaining the shuffle pivot into a lead leg roundhouse, covering enough distance to target his opponent's rear leg. But Tyson went a step further with this principle by simply jumping into it in one go, which allowed him to quickly evade attacks while changing his position so he could counter from an unexpected angle. This movement requires a lot of effort, and you'll likely need to start off by leaning to one side, similar to some gymnastics movements. It's the momentum generated by the movement of the upper body, blending nicely into head movement in this instance, that allows for a smooth transition. Speaking of Tyson, if the opponent was fleeing, Tyson would use a combination of a shuffle hook, sometimes called a gazelle hook, and a turn shift. A turn shift is where your opponent goes to circle away, and rather than circle with them, you just change into another stance. While this temporarily leaves you a little bit more open to attacks, it also allows you the ability to attack immediately without needing to adjust your stance. So Tyson would shuffle into his hook while bringing his rear foot forward during the movement, ending up in southpaw, from which he could better cut off the ring and use follow-up shots. To get this down, just do a gazelle hook, but don't turn too much into it. Instead, stay squared up and bring your back leg a little bit more forward and to the right. Up next are rebound steps, and the crazy things you can do with them. Think of rebounding like jumping across rocks in a pond, pushing off with your foot from rock to rock. Rather than take 2 steps in one direction as is usual, the fighter will take 1 step, then push off in a totally different direction. This shortcut is tiring, but can allow a fighter like Manny Pacquiao to change directions twice as fast. And by changing directions on the half beat, the normal 2-step movement being a whole beat, Manny took fighters by complete surprise. Next is the tactic that inspired this breakdown, since you all seem to like it so much. Rod Tang's kick retraction into a split step to cover distance. A split step is a rapid widening of the stance by jumping both feet apart. It's a very surprising and explosive movement. Here Rod Tang split step off the retraction of his roundhouse, gaining more distance and changing the angle for his left hook. But there are a number of different attacks you could split step off of. You could even split step off of different pieces of footwork. Here's Tawanchai surprising his competition by split stepping halfway through a lead cross step into a knockout roundhouse. In this way, his attack arrives earlier than his opponent thinks is possible. That's why these advanced transitions are so powerful. They're not only shortcuts because they could cover more distance, they're also shortcuts because they could literally cut down on the time it takes for your attack to reach your competitor. You can also rebound off split steps. Tough on the ankles, but it can definitely pay off. Lastly, here's footwork master Rob Kamen, fully retracting his kick, then split stepping, essentially switch shifting into a new stance from southpaw to orthodox, to line up an angle for his cross over his opponent's shoulder. It normally would have taken several different steps and movements to get into the position to exploit the vulnerability. But with this shortcut, he's able to get there in one fluid movement. Up next are hops, where a fighter steps, then jumps off that same foot. Ali and pound-for-pound GOAT Sugar Ray Robinson did this to extend the length of their jab and circle the ring faster. Ali's footwork was admittedly an adaptation or an imitation of his hero Sugar Ray Robinson. It's my guess that Robinson got this move from his love of dance. He even had a dance career afterwards. For a far more practical and easy to utilize version, I would check out the great Jersey Joe Walcott. Ali may have been more fluid, but considering Jersey Joe's much larger frame, his incredible footwork is equally impressive. Hops can be equally great for adding distance to kicks. By swinging and turning your hips forward, you can add even more distance. Pac-Man even used it to cover more distance with his cross, and would pivot as he hopped and after landing on his lead foot. That's a lot of shortcuts, but he was coordinated enough to pull it off. Next is the pendulum shuffle. When a fighter looks to cover a lot of distance before a lead leg kick, they usually have to shuffle into it. But if they're gifted enough, they can lift their lead leg first, then swing their rear hips up to hop off the back leg. This is less telegraphic and covers a whole lot of distance. Lastly, we have an add-on to GSP's Superman Punch footwork. Raising one leg, then hopping onto the other, he would then shuffle to land a lead leg roundhouse. Super athletic, and so strange and creative, I don't understand how he ever thought to do it. The takeaway from all these examples should be that with enough creativity, experience, and athleticism, there's almost no limit to what you can do. Just please, get some experience under your belt and know what you're doing first. The world is full of beginners who try to imitate Ali the first time in the gym.
Manny Pacquiao is a living legend. Over a long and exciting career, Pacquiao has thrilled and inspired countless fans with his unique, aggressive style of boxing. Along the way, he's become the only boxer in history to earn a championship belt in 8 different weight classes. Pacquiao's journey as a professional fighter began at the age of 16, when he stowed himself away on board a rickety ship, looking to land his first fight. Having grown up in extreme poverty, Pacquiao's mother could no longer afford to feed him, and he was intent on making his way in the world as a boxer. Pacquiao soon grew a reputation as a ferocious junior flyweight, who dominated his opponents with sheer aggression and willpower. Despite his blazing fast speed and incredible left hand, Pacquiao's lack of experience regularly landed him in compromising positions. It was in these instances that his true nature showed itself. Like a wounded animal, Pacquiao was, and is to this day, most dangerous when in serious trouble. Where many would have faded or wilted under pressure, Pacquiao has always fought fire with fire. But thankfully, Pacquiao has continued to learn and evolve as a boxer, cultivating one of the greatest fight IQs in combat sports. Here's a quick but poignant example of Pacquiao's intellect. Here, Pacquiao's opponent keeps him at arm's length by controlling his head. This may seem a small point, but entire fights have been won or lost by this tactic. Pacquiao assessed the situation and created a solution in seconds. Identifying the weakness in his strategy, Pacquiao threw a hard lead hook at his competitor's exposed ribs. He would go on to finish the fight, not 10 seconds later. This is the kind of split-second decision-making under intense pressure that sets high-level fighters apart. A huge reason behind Pacquiao's impressive skill set is his trainer, the legendary Freddie Roach, who helped foster and supplement Pacquiao's aggressive style, rather than try to stifle his natural instincts. When most trainers had rejected Pacquiao as an unskilled brawler, Roach noticed a willingness to learn, and a keen mind for strategy. As Pacquiao progressed, Roach was astonished to find that he was finding new, creative ways to use the skills he'd been taught. And Roach, in turn, would build upon and add to Pacquiao's creative alterations, rather than insist on sticking to a rigid, traditional style. The result is a system built equally on intelligence and aggression, and one that should be studied meticulously by all martial artists, but southpaws especially. So let's break down Pacquiao's style, looking at his unique arsenal of punches, combinations, head movement, and footwork. Pacquiao is a high-volume pressure fighter. His punching output alone can overwhelm his opponents, resulting in death by 1,000 cuts. To land these punches at all, Pacquiao first needed to find ways to close distance. This became especially important as he moved up into higher weight classes, fighting opponents far taller with huge reach advantages. For a southpaw like Pacquiao, closing the gap is even trickier. In an open stance, with one fighter's left foot forward and the other's right foot forward, the lead hand and foot of each fighter tend to get in each other's way. Navigating around them is an art form all of its own. Because of this, many southpaws will ignore their jab and instead try to stifle or work around their opponent's lead hand, so that they can land rear hand power shots. But an aggressive fighter like Pacquiao is loath to give up half of his arsenal, and one of Roach's major aspirations for Pacquiao was to give him a lead hand on par with his terrifying left hand. And so, Pacquiao's right hand now lands consistently and has become a major factor in his many, many victories. To achieve this, Pacquiao has a variety of techniques and setups. One of them is to throw his jabs and hooks in a vertical arch, angling over his opponent's lead shoulder. This is particularly effective as a counter to his opponent's jab, taking advantage of the temporary opening in their guard. Yet another strategy is to parry and then counter off of the same hand. Yet one more way is to feint low before going high. Another is to throw with his elbow first, like a back fist. His elbow acts like a shield, stifling his opponent's lead hand as he throws his punch. This works especially well when Pacquiao doubles up on his jab, which allows him to safely cover enough distance to land his cross. A great oddity of Pacquiao's is that he regularly throws his jab with his fist vertical, neglecting to rotate his shoulder. An advantage to this is that it helps him to pry apart his opponent's guard, wedging an opening for follow-up punches. Pacquiao supplements and increases the effectiveness of all of these variations by stepping left, placing his lead foot on the inside of his opponent's. Some more informed viewers may be surprised by this, as much has been made about securing the outside foot position in an open stance. But this is missing half the picture and eliminating half the possibilities. Pacquiao is an expert at dominating exchanges in both foot positions. By placing his foot on the inside of his opponents, Pacquiao shortens the distance of his jab and aligns his lead hand down the center line. A common adage in boxing is that a fighter who has their rear foot on the outside holds the advantage, but this is largely dependent on upper body position, foot angles, and distance. From this position, Pacquiao's jab will beat an opponent's cross. His lead shoulder and elbow can shield him from lead hand attack, and he can easily duck under, smother, or counter rear hand attacks. Roach actually considers moving inside to be more defensive in nature. But what about Pacquiao's own rear hand? Shouldn't his cross and rear hook be rendered ineffective? Usually yes, but Pacquiao's athleticism allows him to pivot off of his lead foot to an utterly ridiculous extent. His extreme mobility lets him throw powerful rear hand attacks in the same way that a martial artist spins to throw a roundhouse kick. The textbook defensive footwork in boxing is to pivot away. Pacquiao's ability to follow his opponents as they pivot and attack with his power hand at the same time makes him one of the most fearsome pressure fighters around. If his opponent squares up and presses forward, even better. In this scenario, Pacquiao is in an ideal position, deep enough inside to perfectly line his left hand. Now let's take a look at the other half of the story, and see how Pacquiao dominates on the outside, and how he's turned his leading cross into one of the most iconic and recognized moves in boxing. Disguising his intention with in and out pendulum steps, Pacquiao will load his weight forward and lunge in deep to the outside, even shuffling into his cross to cover more distance. Actually, Pacquiao's center of balance is so far past his base that at times his shuffle will turn into a skip. The question is, how to keep safe when throwing such a blatant attack? A common saying in martial arts is that when you're not moving your feet, you should be moving your head. So Pacquiao employs rhythmic, side-to-side head movement, not only as a way to stay safe, but also as a way to disguise his entry. Pacquiao conditions his opponents to expect this preparatory motion, dulling their reflexes and easing the initiation of his attack. Pacquiao will set up a predictable tempo intentionally, hoping to draw his opponent's jab. He'll then dip even further outside and step in deeper to counter. And yes, Pacquiao will dip the other way to set up his jab. With Pacquiao, every defensive action is simultaneously a threat. This technique works well as a single attack, with Pacquiao using low-level head movement to exit. However, as the fight progresses, Pacquiao ups the pressure, pressing his opponent and overwhelming them with rapid-fire combinations. It is from the outside cross that Pacquiao throws his most devastating sequence. He'll shift forward while striking with the opposite hand, each step synced up with a punch. When Pacquiao performs this double shift, it's hard not to notice a striking similarity to the notoriously aggressive heavyweight champion, Jack Dempsey. Ideally, Pacquiao's rear foot pins his opponent as he throws his cross, preventing him from pivoting out to safety. If Pacquiao's competitor tries to duck under, an uppercut flows nicely into the sequence as well. As always, Pacquiao will exit off angle. Occasionally, he'll take the traditional way out and move outside. But Pacquiao is most devastating when he exits inside and throws a jarring, raking hook to leave at a defensive angle. For Pacquiao, getting deep into his opponent's space is far more important than foot position. It's this versatility, combined with Pacquiao's power, mobility, and work rate, that have left the majority of his opponents confused and bewildered. Many are left with little option but to shell up and try to endure. But as mentioned before, Pacquiao is highly proficient at breaking through guards and putting together rapid-fire combinations. Some hardier competitors do go for broke, fighting back and welcoming exchanges as a way to perhaps turn the fight around. This can be a very viable strategy, as many pressure fighters are terrible fighting off the back foot. But Pacquiao isn't one of those. Some of his most spectacular KOs occurred while he was under intense fire. This is in part due to the fact that Pacquiao is adept at rebounding off of his back foot, turning a retreat into a quick forward advance, and catching his opponent as he charges full speed into a punch. A more subtle tactic is to lull his opponent to follow him, then suddenly stop short and leap forward into an attack. It's incredible to watch Pacquiao pull this off as a scrawny teenager, and to think how far he's come since. Through hard work, innovation, and pure talent, Pacquiao has retained his place near the top for an unprecedented period of time. One day, age will catch up to him, as it does to every man. He may go out in one last triumphant display of brilliant savagery, or he may get put on notice that his reflexes are not what they once were through a brutal defeat to a low-level competitor. But either way, Pacquiao has proven himself one of the greatest fighters to ever live, and has earned his place as a living legend and a true hero in the brutal and beautiful art of boxing. Vasily Lomachenko is quickly building a reputation as one of the greatest boxers in a generation, and with under 10 professional fights. Why is self-evident. The question is how. How does Lomachenko make everyone else look like they're standing still, while he looks like Neo in the Matrix? The answer is both genius and surprisingly simple. It's well known that Lomachenko uses his incredible footwork to find a dominant angle from which to attack. But the secret lies in how he does this. But to understand that, you have to first understand that this boxer fights like he's playing a game of chess. Every step is pre-planned, and he knows exactly what his opponent's reaction will be before he does. He misdirects his competitors' attention, eliminates their ability to retaliate, and makes sure that no matter what the opponent's next move is, it always ends in checkmate. And he does so using one of the least talked about skills in fighting. Lomachenko takes his opponent's most valuable tool. More than his footwork, more than his speed, and more than his power, a fighter needs his vision. Lose track of your adversary's position for one split second, and you'll pay. When it comes to vision, a defensive boxing guard is a bit like a medieval knight's helmet. There are only small slots to see through, usually one in the front, and two on either side. If you can cover these slots, the fighter's left in the dark. Lomachenko uses his competitor's own defense against them. He coaxes his opponents to cover up tightly, blocks their remaining vision, moves off angle, and then throws. Let's look at an example of how he sets up one of his most impressive sequences, what I like to call the Matador. First, his jab causes his competitor to shell up. Then he feints with his backhand, but unlike an ordinary feint, he keeps his hand in place as he moves to the outside, blocking the front eye slot. He makes sure to keep his hand in their line of sight as he moves away. If all they can see through the small gap in their guard is his hand, they assume the rest of him is still there too. This means that Lomachenko is using his glove the same way a matador uses his cape against a charging bull. The fact this trick works is nothing short of astonishing. As I said before, brilliant and amazingly simple. I can't imagine how frustrating this must be for his opponents, not to mention painful. Lomachenko also likes to block the vision slots on the side of the guard, using his glove, forearm, or shoulder. This traps his adversary's arms in place, protecting him from counters. He can also control their head or pull down their guard. He doesn't need his opponent to cover up to block their vision. He can simply cross one hand over his competitor's eye and then attack with his other hand. As his opponent's eyes get more and more swollen, vision control becomes easier and easier. But one question remains. How does Lomachenko look like he's defying the laws of physics when he pivots and shuffles to his opponent's side? Well, part of the answer to that is that he's just really, really good. But another is that he leans his weight on his opponent's back while shuffling. This keeps his competitors immobile, and I suspect it has a lot to do with his footwork looking like he's breaking the rules of the Matrix. For all of his physical abilities, Lomachenko's most important attribute is his mind. He follows the first tenet from Sun Tzu's The Art of War. If you know the enemy, and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Willie Pep had perhaps the greatest footwork of all time. He masterfully blended his defense and his offense together, sidestepping his opponents as they crashed into the ropes, and skillfully steering them into his punches. His footwork has recently seen a resurgence in MMA, with Dominic Cruz citing him as a major source of inspiration. You already know some of his best moves if you've seen my video on TJ Dillashaw. But today, we're going to be looking at something we've never covered before, Pep's most prevalent, versatile, and powerful technique, his shifting V-step. Rather than shifting by moving forwards or backwards, Pep changed stances by stepping one foot to the other, as if you were about to shuffle, and then stepping out into a new stance, making the shape of a V. This made his movement incredibly non-telegraphic, and opened up whole new angles from which to attack, or retreat, offline. Pep used this V-step to move 180 degrees with little effort. On the few occasions that Pep's competitors managed to corner him, they would often find that they had switched places suddenly, and now they were the ones trapped in the corner. In this clip, you can see Pep V-step around his competitor in a way very similar to how Lomachenko does it today. Pep would even V-step as he circled the ring, constantly switching stances and never giving his opponents a chance to set up an angle of attack. The way that Pep squared himself up every time he stepped his feet together meant that he could smoothly move in any direction he chose. To use a chess analogy, his one-stanced opponent was stuck with certain positions from which they could attack, like a bishop, while Pep could move in any direction, like the queen. As you watch this clip, see if you can guess which way Pep will move next. After placing his feet together, Pep could either step out and jab, check hook with his left or his right, and turn either hand into his power hand, i.e. his rear hand. Defensively, Pep's stance switching allowed him the full array of head movement, letting him lean far back towards his new rear foot. Pep was also an expert at making his opponents chase and overreach, leading them right into his attacks. There will be a full breakdown of Willie Pep in the future, but for now, stay tuned for a breakdown of another great MMA fighter who heavily utilizes Pep's footwork. And by the way, I have decided to write that book on footwork, so please leave suggestions for fighters and techniques you'd like to see included in the comments. From the Modern Martial Artist, this has been David Christian, wishing you happy training. Many fighters have power, many fighters have balance, and many fighters have mobility. But Sugar Ray Leonard had all three. Leonard took inspiration for his style from Sugar Ray Robinson and Muhammad Ali. He used fast, fluid motion and complex footwork to outmaneuver and confuse his opponents. He could effortlessly move in any direction he wished, able to not only catch his opponents, but put power into the shots while doing so. So let's take it step by step, and look at the techniques that made Sugar Ray Leonard so unique. Like Ali and Robinson, Leonard began most fights by landing powerful jabs while circling to the inside. Particularly, double jabs to the head and body. The head shots would sting and swallow his opponent's eyes shut, impairing their vision, and the body shots would win them and take away their legs. There are broadly two ways to step to the inside in a fight, both having different uses. The first is the method taught to all new boxers, and involves moving the foot in the direction you're going first. In other words, if you're moving left, your left foot moves first. This technique does square you up, opening you to more attacks, but also allows easier use of your rear hand and better lateral movement. The second technique is a cross step, moving your back foot first. This sacrifices some stability and makes it harder to hit with your power hand, but it also narrows your body and makes it easier to pivot. So it's perfect for circling and jabbing at long range. Leonard used both the traditional and cross-step technique while circling, opening up to shuffle out and change angles, and cross-stepping to jab and take a more defensive position. In this way, he could change angles every time his opponent got set, and then jab at them from a defensive posture as they readjusted. Leonard's linear movement, his ability to move in and out, was equally as impressive. He would establish a pattern and rhythm before manipulating both to set up strikes. In this clip, Leonard feints by double stepping, making his competitor overreact with his foot movement alone. Leonard would establish this feint and then mix it with real strikes throughout his fights, leaving his opponents overreactive and guessing. He would sometimes jab on a second step, sometimes both steps, sometimes even adding a third. When Leonard had his opponent thoroughly confused, he would add on crosses. Once again, he played with the pattern, adding and subtracting punches. Every time an opponent reacted to a step instead of a real strike, a new opening was created for Leonard to exploit. What's truly impressive is that Leonard set all of these combinations up off of lead foot movement alone. Leonard was a master at combining his linear and lateral movement together to gain an incredible range of motion. He did this mainly through L-stepping, sliding one foot back and the other to the side in the shape of an L. By doing so, he was able to quickly and fluently move in any direction he chose, able to attack off angle, or escape from the corner back to the center of the ring. But what made Leonard truly formidable was his ability to manipulate his distance so rapidly and effortlessly while attacking. Even when throwing everything he had to try to knock out an opponent, his feet were moving faster than his hands, adjusting by inches to stay at the perfect distance and create openings. As I said before, many fighters have power, many fighters have balance, and many fighters have mobility. But a fighter with all three is truly something special. Iron Mike Tyson was one of the most exciting and controversial champions of our lifetime. Explosive and unpredictable, Tyson was like a stick of dynamite that could go off at any second. In his prime, he was always in the perfect position to deliver a knockout blow that would appear to come out of nowhere and send his opponent flying across the ring. Tyson was trained by arguably the greatest boxing coach of all time, Cus D'Amato. D'Amato honed Tyson into an aggressive counterpuncher by teaching Mike his style of fighting, the same style he had taught Floyd Patterson years before, and commonly referred to as the peekaboo style. The peekaboo style is generalized as simply slipping your opponent's attack in a tight guard before opening up to deliver a power blow. But that's just the first step in D'Amato's ingenious system, a system that took full advantage of the fact that Tyson had knockout power in both hands and was also comfortable fighting with either foot forward. By using the peekaboo head movement, Tyson was able to get deep into his opponent's guard, placing his back foot right next to his opponent's front. This was an incredibly dangerous position for both Tyson and his opponent. But the beauty of this open, staggered stance was that Tyson could expertly transfer out of it into any angle he chose. Far from a wild brawler, Tyson knew each position inside and out, and chose the perfect punches to accompany his switching stances. To explain the nuances of all of them in depth would take several videos, but let's take a minute to really understand just how versatile Tyson was and how he knew every stance and every angle inside and out. Tyson could transition into an open southpaw stance with his right foot inside, a dominant angle to attack with your lead hand. An open southpaw stance with his right foot outside, a dominant angle from which to attack with your rear hand. An orthodox position almost completely behind his opponent, pretty much advantageous in every way possible. A southpaw position almost completely behind his opponent, even more dominant. He would sometimes shuffle right past his opponent and end up in a closed southpaw stance, kind of like when you go out of screen on an old video game and end up on the other side. Many of his opponents mistook Tyson's aggression for stupidity, but he had one of the greatest ring IQs in boxing history. Tyson could seamlessly change stances by shuffling or stepping in any direction. This meant he could use either stance to cut off the ring, chase his opponents down, or shuffle and counter to the left or the right with little preparation. For an aggressive counterpuncher, this freedom of movement is the ultimate advantage. Tyson was an expert at using this technique to break through an opponent's guard. He used combinations of uppercuts and head and body hooks to decimate his competitors. He would shuffle inside to uppercut and outside to hook, just like Patterson did before him. This was a matter of precision, with Tyson readjusting his feet just a few inches to make the difference. His shifting footwork also allowed him to cover distance quickly while attacking. Here he looks very similar to one of his biggest idols, Jack Dempsey. Now let's look at how the peekaboo style greatly amplified the power in Tyson's punches. First, Tyson's extreme slips and shifts tended to load most of his weight onto one leg. And since the power of a punch is greatly increased by shifting weight from one foot to another, this meant Tyson's punches were preloaded with power, his defense serving to increase the potency of his offense. Tyson also tended to shuffle into moves that were normally stepped into, increasing his distance and momentum. He scored many knockouts simply moving into his favorite squared up, staggered stance. But more than anything, Tyson's power was maximized by his ability to catch his opponents unaware as they were coming in. Two expressions hold very true here. A punch that gets you coming in hits twice as hard, and it's the punches you don't see coming that hurt you. Very few people could pull off this style. It was possible for Tyson and Patterson because of their raw talent and the genius behind the peekaboo style. One of boxing's greatest trainers, Cus D'Amato.
Orlando Canizales once hit a man so hard he did a somersault. And, like the rest of his incredible style, Canizales' power was rooted in his absolutely insane high-level footwork. Canizales combined lightning-fast movements with unusual angles and ferocious intensity to cut his way through the bantamweight division. At only 5'4", Canizales still had enough power to earn an impressive 37 KOs. The closest thing to a real-life Wolverine from X-Men, Canizales defended his title 15 times, and he often made it look easy, simply walking through elite competition. So let's take a look at the unusual but highly effective footwork that made Canizales such a terror to his opponents. The first thing you'll notice when watching Canizales is probably how much he liked to play with angles. Canizales was like Willie Pep after 10 cups of coffee. He could move to the inside or the outside, and preferred to do so at mid or long range. And these would set up his enters and exits into and out of exchanges. By moving so deep to the inside, Canizales would square up with his opponent, much like Mike Tyson liked to do. This is an incredibly risky position, since it left both him and his opponent equally open and vulnerable. But like Tyson, Canizales was betting that he was just better, and could beat his opponent while squared up, mano a mano. That being said, Canizales was a lot trickier and craftier than that. He was betting that he could win these dangerous positions, not because he was tougher, but because he knew his skillful use of angles could keep him safe and set up his punches. For instance, by stepping so deep to the inside towards his opponent's rear foot, he aligned his rear hand directly down the center line. And this put him in the perfect position to set up crosses, overhands, or rear uppercuts. But of course, stepping to this dangerous inside position brought Canizales' head closer to his opponent's rear hand as well, presenting a tantalizing target. But Canizales was ready for this and used it against them. After Canizales drew a punch, he would move in even deeper with a step or a shuffle. He was very fond of this 1 and 2 and rhythm.
but it would also mix it up by pausing at times, further confusing the opponent. Whichever method he used, Canizales' extra steps deeper inside added considerable power to his counters. The results speak for themselves. But this was only half the story, because Canizales also had a lot of tactics involving moving to the outside, towards his opponent's back. And much like how his inside movement perfectly aligned his rear hand down the opponent's center line, Canizales' outside movement perfectly aligned his lead hand down the opponent's center line. And this put him at a dominant angle to uppercut or hook between or around his opponent's guard. By putting his opponents at this awkward angle, Canizales forced them to adjust in order to get him back in their sights. But in the time it took them to adjust, Canizales would already land his counter. I've covered this concept of using angles to gain tempo before with other fighters. But if you'd like to see a good, in-depth video on this concept specifically about Canizales, I would recommend checking out Hidden Gems channel after you're done watching this video. The guy does really good work. It's really worth pointing out though, that Canizales' movement didn't just create advantageous angles, it also packed an insane amount of power into his punches. For instance, by stepping outside as he threw, Canizales could add a tremendous amount of power to his lead hand, just as he could add a lot of power to his rear hand by stepping inside. Because he was constantly playing with angles and feinting to either side, opponents never really knew which way he would go, and Canizales would pair these inside and outside sequences together. Notice here how he uses the inside pattern, then immediately executes the outside pattern. These fast transitions often left opponents bewildered, or sometimes not, because it's hard to be bewildered while you're unconscious. Because Canizales was so comfortable with these extreme outside angles, it was very easy for him to pull off turn shift counters. Rather than realign himself into his proper stance when opponents tried to exit out of an exchange, Canizales was comfortable enough to simply turn into a southpaw position, catching his opponent as he tried to flee. It's worth noting that Canizales could stop moving if he wanted to, instead using head movement to create these extreme angles, although to a lesser extent. These tactics are very popular with close-range fighters, as placing the head on either side of the center line can create many of the same punching angles. But while Canizales was decent at this, he really thrived using the extreme angles available from mid to long-range footwork. After all, these head positions could never create the same kind of power that his footwork could. But what Canizales did do was use these head movement tactics to supplement his incredible footwork, and these set up some ludicrous tricks and tactics. His favorite sequence was to move deep inside, then weave away to exit outside. With this same pattern, he could draw punches to set up multiple different shots. For instance, he could counter his opponent's punch on the entry, or throw during or after exiting. Or he could enter, exit outside again, but then immediately rebound right back with an even harder punch. By playing with expectations like this, Canizales could box circles around his competitors. Remember, in just this breakdown, we've covered how he went from inside to deeper inside, inside outside, or inside outside inside. If you're confused, just imagine how it felt to be his competitors. This is why Orlando Canizales is amazing to watch. He was an aggressive bolt of lightning in the ring, but Canizales was able to channel that unrelenting ferocity into highly developed technical mastery. Put simply, he was one of a kind. To learn more about the techniques covered in this video, you can check out my books on footwork, power, and aggressive defense, linked below. From the Modern Martial Artist, this has been David Christian, wishing you happy training.